Welcome everyone to session number 2 of Jewish Spirituality from the Bible Until Today. Last week we had a chance to look at an introduction and overview of what we're going to be learning, as well as sort of diving into the Torah itself as a spiritual document, particularly from the vantage point of those who had the earliest access to those texts, how they may have seen them, understood them, how those texts may have developed. And we're going to see some repeated themes this week, but also certainly some new themes as well. We have 2 focuses this week. First, prophecy, and second, Psalms. Both of these, of course, could be, an entire graduate level seminar, and we have an hour and a few minutes to cover both. So we'll do what we can. Because this is more of a survey kind of course rather than anything too in-depth. You have all read some, if not entire books of the prophets. So these are the Nevi'im, the second of in Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the prophets. The books, the classical prophets, which is what we're going to be looking at today, lived from anywhere between the 8th to the 5th centuries BCE. From what you already know, from what you've seen within the prophets, who are they? What are they like? What's their experience as being prophets? And it may be helpful for you to say who they are not. Either who they are not within the Jewish tradition or who they're not as compared to, let's say, Eastern religions. So jump right on it.
They're not politicians?
Oh, if they were, they'd be terrible politicians. Yeah, definitely. They would not have been voted into office. They wouldn't even get their own vote, let alone anybody else's. Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
For the most part, they're not really soothsayers. They don't read palms and predict the future.
Good. So yes, they don't read the signs importance, so to speak. Very good. And just to loop back to Claudette for a moment, they're also not politicians in the sense that they're not kings, right? They don't have political power, which is probably what you meant and not what I think about it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else?
The other thing is that they're not listened to. Most people didn't listen to them.
Yeah, definitely. They were not only not popular, they were basically wholly rejected by their people. Arguably the only successful prophet was Jonah, and he was successful and was disappointed with his success. I have to say he didn't want to be successful. Nineveh repented and he was upset about it. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the prophets are not sages, right? Or wise men, right? They're not turned to for being particularly wise or insightful. They're not people who know text well. If you can even think about people then having access to text. They're not priests, although some prophets could be, but by the idea of prophecy is quite distinct from the idea of the priesthood. And they're not mystics, right? In the way that we would imagine a mystic today or in the past, or searching the earth for something. That's not what they're like at all. So what I want to do is jump into a few prophetic texts, particularly texts that are calling on the prophet, to pull out some themes that we see from them, to get a sense of what prophecy was like for the prophet, and sort of how our tradition puts forward what prophecy is and who the prophets were. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. Okay, we can all see that? Okay, and this week, if I seem to be reading from a screen and it's as if I'm sharing it, but you're not seeing it, tell me, because I'll make sure to share it properly. Okay, so this is the 6th chapter of the prophet Isaiah Yeshayahu. And the prophecy itself, the content, I think will be one which is familiar to you. In fact, I think we looked at it briefly last week. So near that King Uzziah died, Isaiah saw this thing. I beheld my Lord. Okay? I saw, I beheld. So that's this word right here, beheld. Is seeing something which is voluntary. No, I would say no. And the language here isn't I had a prophecy. It's from the roots ra'ah, to see, in the same sense, like, open up my eyes and see. So from my sense, this is something which is involuntary. And he uses that verb again later on. It's something that happens. Okay, so what does he see? He sees these seraphim, these seraphs, 6 wings. They call each other Kadosh, 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 right? Holy, holy, holy. And what does Isaiah say? He cries. Okay, the first thing he says, Oi li, woe is me, oi, right? So oi is from, we still say it today, right? It's from Tanakh. Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my own eyes have beheld the King, Lord of hosts. What is Isaiah's reaction? Tell me about it.
One of shock.
Shock,
Sure.
good.
It's like he didn't believe what he saw.
He didn't feel worthy of it.
Yeah, worthiness for sure. I'm not sure I'm not believing, because he says, yet my own eyes have beheld, right? So I think he's not denying that he had this experience, but he's certainly feeling like, I'm not deserving of this. Right? I have unclean lips, and the people around me have unclean lips. And I think that there's a sense of this idea of being lost, nidmeti. He is, there's some sense of awe, maybe being scared, I think Swakvadet said. Right? The suddenness of this all.
There's a little bit of humility here too.
So there's a good question about the humility. It's hard to tell from description, like if it's something like this, what they're feeling exactly, right? Because he says, I am of unclean lips. Now we could say, that's just a turn of phrase, but if you look at the next line, one of the seraphim comes over with this coal, right? And touches his lips and then says, now I've touched your lips, your guilt shall depart, your sin be purged away. So the action, this angel is actually agreeing with Isaiah that, yeah, you're right. You are not a perfect person, which tells us both an acknowledgement from above that, yeah, the prophets are picked from people who aren't perfect, but also that from what we see, yeah, prophets aren't ideal types. They're people who are chosen. We don't always know why, but they're chosen to do this thing, and they don't even know that they're chosen until they have this first experience, right? So certainly there's no, it's not hereditary, right? I think it's Amos, who's the earliest of our prophets, begins, I'm not a prophet, but the son of a prophet, right? So it's not saying passed on from father to son or mother to daughter. Rather, it's something that suddenly happens to you. Boom. Okay. So what happens at that point? So the sin is taken away with the touch of this coal to his lips. What does that remind you of, by the way?
Moses.
Moses. Good. So there's this midrash about Moses, right? That why does Moshe have a stutter? Because when he was first placed in front of Pharaoh, Pharaoh's people said, this guy's bad news. He's a baby. Bad news, bad news. So Pharaoh puts in front of him some jewels as well as some coals, and he's going to reach for the jewels, and that's going to be the end of Moshe. But God pushes his hand toward the coals, and then he sort of touches it to his lip, and that's where he gets the lisp from. And clearly, that midrash is the root of that midrash. Really, it's what's what I'm looking for. It's inspired by this text. Okay, and of course, who is Moshe but the first prophet? Right, Moshe is the the prophet of all prophets. He's a different relationship with God than the classical prophets. But there is certainly a sense that the prophets themselves are a continuation of what Moshe began. And if we were to look in Devarim, we could see that more clearly. We're not going to do that today. Okay, so what happens as this prophecy continues? Then I heard the voice of my Lord saying, whom shall I send? Whom will go for us? And it's at that point that Yeshayahu says, Hineni shlacheni. Here I am, send me. Right? And this language, of course, of Hineni, right, that harkens back to Avraham himself. And we see it elsewhere within our tradition. So first he seems to sort of shudder, and then he's okay, like, I feel good about it now. But what is the role of the prophet? What does a prophet do?
Bring messages from God.
Bring messages from God. Very good. And that's exactly what we're about to see. And the messages are all largely within the same category of, you're doing bad things, fix yourselves up. So God says, go say to the people, hear indeed, but do not understand, see indeed, but do not grasp. Tell that people's minds, stop its ears, etc. And then Isaiah actually goes back, how long, my Lord? And God says, till towns lie waste without inhabitants, banish the population, and so on and so forth. So there is this sense of doom. What the prophet is not doing, you see a little bit, but not much. Moshe does is much, much more. He's not defending the people, right? He's certainly not being their emissary. He's God's emissary, right? And it's been pointed out that the role of the prophet is to sort of reach out God's own hand to pull a distant people near. Okay, the people are far away, whether that's physically or spiritually. And the role of the prophet is to hold them and bring them back into the relationship, bring them back into covenant with God.
To speak truth to power.
Yes, in terms of the human power. Okay, yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at it. One commentator has used the language of receiving prophecy is like a rupture in self-consciousness. Okay, that suddenly their own existence and their idea of self for the prophets changes immensely after having this experience of prophecy, and it always comes out of nowhere. Okay, but they're always commissioned, like we just saw. So let's look at Yechezkel and Ezekiel. This is from the first chapter. I'll begin in the 4th verse. Once again, this language of I looked, and the root is ra'ah, right? So it's seeing. And lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud and flashing fire, surrounded by a radiance. And in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of ember. And this is another sort of famous prophecy that what does he see? This figure with 4 faces and 4 wings, a terrifying prophecy, frankly. And it's out of this prophecy that there's a whole branch of mysticism that has developed simply out of this one chapter. Okay, we won't go through the actual prophecy itself. Needless to say, to have seen this would have been something which was, awe-inspiring and terrifying. And importantly here, when I beheld it, I flung myself down on my face. He wasn't ready for it. He didn't think he was deserving, right? Also, because if you look at God and see, that's going to be a problem for you as well. So this isn't, I didn't know this was coming. I wasn't ready for this. There is a particular prophecy within Yechezkel, which I have always found interesting. And you mortal, heed what I say to you, do not be rebellious, blah, blah, blah. Okay, verse number 9, as I looked, there was a hand stretched out to me holding a written scroll. He unrolled it before me, and it was inscribed on both the front and the back. On it were written lamentations, dirges, and woes. Okay? And then what's the instruction? God says to Yechezkel, mortal, eat what is offered you, eat this scroll, and go speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. Okay, and he said to me, mortal, feed your stomach and fill your belly with the scroll that I give you. And I ate it. It tasted like sweet as honey to me. So there is this real symbolism here of, it's not just God speaking and repeating, but it's the sense of ingesting the words of God that are then shared with the people. We don't have this in a lot of places, but it is here, so I wanted to share it with you. So being the emissary is really, it's a full body experience for Yechezkel. So again, a scene of commission. This is from Jeremiah, the first chapter. The word of the Lord came to me, before I created you in the womb, I selected you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet concerning the nations. I said, Lord God, I don't know how to speak. Right? Again, this lo yadati daber, kinar nochi, because I am young. Right? The sense of like, I'm not deserving of this. This is not something I sought out. This is not something I was thinking was going to be for me. It's something that you're bringing to you're bringing to me, and it seems as if it's not because I have been, a good boy, right? You chose within the text itself. It's teaching. It's nothing about what you've done, because you were chosen earlier, before you had a chance to exercise your free will. And of course, the whole book of the prophets is an indication that we have free will, because prophets are offering them a chance to repent, and they generally fail. Okay. Anyone on this?
Well, maybe when he said, well, however young he is, maybe he's just saying, I'm not ready. I'm too young.
Yeah, we could say that for Jeremiah. I'm not ready yet, I'm too young. And certainly the Nar Anochi plays into it. But it's not like God turns to him and says, you're good. I'm letting you know now for later. Or I want to explain to you why I picked you. Right? It's all boom. I chose you and that's it. Claudette mentioned earlier that they were not popular. They were certainly not. This is Jeremiah complaining to God, source number 5. You enticed me, O Lord, and I was enticed. You overpowered me, and you prevailed. Right? So like you took over me and you won. You were able to use me as your instrument. And what's been the result? I become a constant laughing stock. Everyone jeers at me. For every time I speak, I must cry out, must shout lawlessness and repine. For the word of the Lord causes me constant disgrace and contempt. I thought I will not mention him. No more will I speak in his name. But his word was like a raging fire in my heart, shut up in my bones. I could not hold it in. I was helpless. Right? So we see here both of the rejection that the prophet feels from the people, right? They're not just ignoring him, they're making fun of him. Right? They're giving him a very hard time, but also the sense that he has no control over what he's doing. He can't choose not to prophesy. He has to, right? And think back to Bilam in Bamidbar, right? Who says repeatedly to the king, like, I can only say what God tells me to say. Like, I don't have a choice here. Same here with Jeremiah. Makes it very clear. Not only does not get to choose the words, he actually doesn't get to choose whether or not he's going to even say the words. There is, an ongoing concern about false prophets, and how do you know a false prophecy from not? So my mother mentioned earlier, the prophets really weren't interested in, I'm going to tell you what happens in the future, right? There's a little bit of that, but generally, when we think about prophets today, we often use the language: if you're a prophet, you know what the stock market is going to do tomorrow, or the next year or 10 years from now. That really wasn't the primary role of ancient Hebrew prophets. But there was always a concern that there were false prophets. And so on. And there was this idea, well, how do you know it's a false prophet? Well, if what they say doesn't come true, well, you'll know. Well, that's not helpful until, if they say in 10 years from now, you're waiting around for 10 years to figure out if they're not true or not. But really, the tests seem to have been much more rooted in the extent to which the prophet themselves seems seized by God's own presence, right? This sense of, I don't want this. I didn't plan for this. I'm not saying this to be popular, right? Because you have like 400 prophets who sort of prop up a king or here or there. The Israelite prophets was not like that. It was a sense of like total lack of control of who they are. And if you saw that in someone's eyes and their words, there was a sense this is someone who you could accept. And the prophets themselves spoke out against the false prophets. So here Jeremiah says, they have sown wheat and reaped thorns. They've endured pain to no avail. Be shamed then by your harvest, by the blazing wrath of the Lord. Thus said the Lord, as for my wicked neighbors who encroach on the heritage that I give to my people Israel, I'm going to uproot them from their soil, uproot them from the house of Judah, out of the midst of them. But after I've uprooted them, I'll take them back into favor and restore them each to his own inheritance in his own land. So there's always an opportunity for repentance. Skip that one. Excuse me. We're gonna jump down a bit. Okay. I put an X next to something, and I don't remember if the X was because I wanted to teach the source or because I didn't want to teach the source. Right, so this is just another text of what God's going to do to the false prophets, and things are not going to end well for them. Source number 11. Then the word of the Lord came to me, O house of Israel. Can I not deal with you like this potter, says the Lord? Just like clay in the hands of the potter, so are you in my hands. What is that? I know my mother recognizes it right away. What does that remind us of? Where else do we see this line?
Yom Kippur.
It's one of the piyutim that we have on Yom Kippur. Although I think Adith uses a different tune.
Yeah.
Oh no, Adith I don't think uses a tune because Cantor Stein doesn't like this piyut, so I don't think we actually do it, which is too bad because I like it.
Right.
Just like clay in the hands of the potter, so you're in my hands. At one moment I made a decree, the nation or kingdom shall be uprooted and pulled down and destroyed, but the nation against which I made the decree turns back from its wickedness. I changed my mind concerning the punishment I plan to bring on it. Continues in the same vein. None of this is sort of new. We already had a conversation of what the role of the prophet is, what the prophet is doing. This is language here, we talk about prophetic covenantal religiosity, that the prophet is really concerned about the covenant, about connecting the Israelite people with God, right? That they should, that is their religious message, that's their spiritual quest, is to bring the people to God, and that God is the one who's commissioning them to do that, right? They're not wandering the earth to understand existence. They don't see God as being part of the greater universe, right? That's not the biblical understanding of God, right? There is this independent being called God who calls upon these independent beings called humans to reach out to these other independent beings, a group called Israel. And the role of the prophet is to get those people to follow their half of the deal to fulfill their role in the covenant. And it's not so much about like, if only you would keep Shabbat, right? Or you're not doing a good enough job separating between wool and linen in your garments, right? It's not about specific commandments. generally speaking, right? It is to say, it is generally speaking. It's you people, you're not accepting that you actually have responsibilities in this relationship. You have to do these things called commandments. You have to fulfill your ends of the bargain. It's never, you're pretty good at the mitzvot, but I think you could do better 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's the mitzvot as a collective whole, you need to be doing a better job with. Okay? Although, sometimes we, like the Haftarah, getting back to Yom Kippur, that we chant in the morning about, God caring really about the mitzvot that have to do with interpersonal relationships more than mitzvot dealing with ritual matters. We do have that kind of message about how to treat your neighbor. But again, it's sort of more general. It's not like, if only you would pay your worker on the day that they worked, which is one of the commandments in the Torah. It has to do with treating your workers well as a general thing. Something else which we're not going to look at deeply, but I do want to share, is the idea that the prophets are divinely inspired interpreters of reality from a covenantal perspective. Okay? So an interpreter of reality, so divinely inspired, right? So God is the one who's sort of directing them. That we understand. Interpreter of reality is someone who looks at the world as, as most people experience it, and interprets it to the people. And they do so from a covenantal perspective. That is, they'll see things like an earthquake. And while a seismologist will say, this is an earthquake because our Earth has natural fault lines of tectonic plates that shift, a prophet will look at that and with divine inspiration will explain that reality as saying, see this earthquake? It's because you weren't following God. Right? They're interpreting through through a covenantal lens, whether it's an earthquake or very often foreign domination. Right? Why was your land conquered? Why are you no longer the masters of your own domain? Because you suck. Because you weren't following what God had to say. You rejected God. As a whole, not individuals, and not because you weren't good at specific mitzvah, but just your general behavior that anyone looking at you would say you're not interested. And if you're not interested in pleasing God, God is not interested in pleasing you. Okay. It's worth noting the prophets really didn't talk about the priesthood at all. We talked about them being separate domains, but the priest could have been easy targets, right? Because here you have people who are living off of the welfare of others, right? They're supported by the community, and there are probably some good priests and probably some not so good priests. The prophets don't ever really go after them or mock them. They never say that what's really important is ritual. They don't go against the prophets don't attack the priests and say what you do is not important, right? The prophets are interested in lots of areas of life, including ritual, but not exclusively ritual. Whereas the priests are really only interested in ritual, but the prophets never say to the priest, you're only dealing with the small portion of things. They sort of let the priests do their thing. Okay, yes, Claudette.
Doesn't the prophet sometimes chastise the priests like Eli's sons when they were behaving badly? Somewhere in Samuel, they talk about what the end of them will be because of what they were doing.
Samuel itself doesn't come from the classical prophecy, prophetic period. I would have to look at the text itself. I don't want to give you a bad answer. So I'll have to look it up. And so you're talking about the sons of Eli the Kohen.
Right. How they were behaving badly in Shiloh.
And who's the one who challenges them?
I'm not sure who prophesied and said that they're going to have a bad end, but I know it's somewhere in the book of Samuel.
Okay. I believe you. I
Yeah.
wish I knew the answer off the top of my head, and I don't.
Yeah,
So
I
don't
can
want
take a closer look to see who chastised them.
Okay. One thing that the prophetic texts are not, they're not texts, right? That is, they were, the way that they seem to have been given, so to speak, or the way that they're written down and meant to be read, if we can talk about sort of that kind of intention, is here was something that God shared with a person, that a person shared with people at that time, and they were meant to understand it on its face. That it wasn't coded. It meant what it meant, and they're supposed to do something about it. But when we get to Daniel, who's the sort of the final of the classic prophets, we start seeing a different kind of prophet. That is, excuse me. Since, and I don't actually, this actually might not even be the best example of this. Again, Daniel has visions. He is a prophet, but what he is doing, he actually begins to reinterpret earlier prophecies. And he has to, because they haven't come true in the way that one would have thought. So he becomes not just a prophet because God is acting through him, because God is speaking, but a prophet because he is beginning this process of interpreting in new ways. And I think we'd have to really look at Daniel to sort of more broadly to understand that. So, I think we will not do that so much right now, because I want to get into the Psalms. Any final sort of thoughts, questions about prophets' prophecy?
I have two questions.
Sure.
One is about Daniel. Wasn't Daniel more an interpreter of dreams than a prophet?
So Daniel has a few things. And, it's a difficult book for a lot of reasons. Part of it's in Aramaic. But, I mean, you could just look at his commission here. On 24th day of the first month, I was on the river, right? And the language in Hebrew, right? I lifted up my eyes and I saw. So again, it's the same root of ra'ah, of seeing things, right? So this is again a commission. And what does he see, right? His body was like beryls, face appearing lightning, etc. I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. Men who were with me did not see the vision. So he clearly has that piece of him, not just dreams.
And my next question is, around what time did prophecy end?
So the classical prophecy, as we understand within Tanakh, is some point around the 5th century BCE.
Mm-hmm.
One could make an argument potentially for later, but it generally understood 8th century to 5th century BCE.
So that is long before the destruction of the Second Temple.
Oh, well before that. So 500 years plus.
So between that time when it ends and the Second Temple, what do we have? The sages, the rabbis?
We have priests.
We
have sages. We actually don't know much about the religious life of Jews during the Second Temple period. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is, right? That time year, it's destroyed in the year 70, but it's built well before. We actually don't have a good sense of what it was like to be a Jew then, which is really unfortunate and surprising. Etty, I cannot. Yeah, there you are.
Aren't Ezra and Nehemiah prophets during the Second Temple?
Yes, they are prophets, but they're not, because Ezra and Nehemiah, the books themselves are within Ketuvim. Okay. Right? So they're sort of seen in a bit of a different light in that way.
But they are prophets.
but I'm trying to remember their time. They are in that sense. I'm just trying to remember what year, because they're obviously in the end of the exile period. So we're still talking 5th century with Ezra Nehemiah.
So wasn't it during the Second Temple?
Well, they come back and the temple is built.
Right.
Yeah, so it's the very beginning of the Second Temple.
Then there is a contradiction,
Why?
because you said earlier that it was before the long before the Second Temple that
Was destroyed. Was destroyed.
or destroyed.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't
Yeah,
clear.
destroyed, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So let's go into our second half here, which is Tehillim, which is Psalms. There are a lot of ways of approaching Psalms. I think like we saw last week and a bit now, my process that I'm trying to teach is much more sort of historical, academic, if you will, form critical, rather than like how do we use Psalms in our own spiritual life. But my hope is, particularly with Psalms, but I think for the class generally, is that the more you learn about something, not only that you deconstruct it, you also take the time to reconstruct it in a way that becomes even more meaningful to you. Sometimes you deconstruct things and you feel at a loss. Like, oh my God, I never realized that the Torah says this. Now that I realize it, I'm unhappy, I'm rejecting. But actually, I think it's more important than you build up and you're stronger than you were before. And a new kind of religiosity to some extent. Arguably, and this is a very generalization, if prophets, and we understand Nevi'im as being God reaching out to a wayward people, trying to bring them in, a distant people, Tehillim in a lot of ways is the opposite. It is the language of an Israelite reaching out to what they feel to be a distant God, trying to bring God to them. Okay, so the directionality is the opposite. So I think that's an important kind of frame. The classical view of Tehillim was that they were written, or they came about at a specific occasion. Okay, like something happened in history that caused King David to write a very personal psalm. Okay, that is the way Tehillim are understood classically, traditionally. All three of those assumptions have been thrown out the window, so to speak. So there wasn't always a specific occasion for the writing of a psalm, though they might be written in the first person, singular. They weren't intended as such. They were always intended, by one person, written for general usage. And they certainly weren't written by King David. Did I say that part already? So there's no specific occasion. They're not personal and they're not Davidic. But they are very moving. And they do lots of different things, and that's what we're going to look at right now. So one of the challenges when you're studying Psalms is that the what we call the versification is different between Jews and Christians. That is, for Jews, when we have something like this psalm, Mizmor LeDavid, that we include as part of the superscription and a part of verse number 1. Whereas Christians don't see that as a verse unto itself. Okay, so and about half of the Psalms mention King David, and it's always this. It usually begins like Mizmor LeDavid, the Psalm of David. And while Jews will say that's part of the verse, Christians will not include in part of the verse. So sometimes what Jews will say verse 5, Christians will actually have as being verse 4. So depending what Bible you're looking at, or in my case, depending what Bible my assistant is looking at when she puts together the source sheet, because I tell her what verses to include, you might end up with the verses that I want, or you might end up with the verses I don't want. So that happened a couple times. That's okay. So we have here Psalm number 3, a Psalm of David when he fled from his son Avshalom. Okay, I believe in the, certainly for Jews, that's verse number 1. I think in a lot of Christian texts, this wouldn't be a verse at all. It's the superscription to the chapter of Tehillim, because it's really a descriptor of the apparent occasion on which this psalm was written. But historically, looking at this, we actually don't believe that this is a psalm written by David when he flees from Avshalom. That the superscripture was actually probably written. It's not even a historical piece. It was written at the same time as the psalm. Was probably written later, right? Someone wrote the psalm and someone else tacked on that line above it. Okay. So what did the psalm say? O Lord, my God, in you I seek refuge. Deliver me from all my pursuers and save me, lest like a lion they tear me apart, rending me in pieces, and no one save me. Okay, what is that? Tell me about those two verses.
Someone who needs to feel comforted and is holding on to God because, that's the place that they want to find refuge in.
Good. And who are they finding refuge from?
From someone who is after them.
Yeah.
Let me see. The thing about Psalm, Rabbi, I find them meditative, which means that when you say them, because in my past life, religious life, I had to memorize Psalms.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a whole lot of Psalms in my head that you can say. But when you're saying them, you don't pay attention to the words or the meaning or who's speaking, because you just say them for a meditative purpose.
So I think this is sort of, again, reflective of our conversation last week about particularly using, verbalizing as a form of worship. Or in your case, you're saying meditation, which is related, irrespective of the actual meaning of the words themselves.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And we actually, we think when we pray that what we say matters, but we also believe for almost all prayers, our intent doesn't. Right? So as long as our intent is, I'm doing this in order to fulfill my obligation of prayer, you don't have to actually intend the words that you're saying themselves, as long as you say them, right? So I can get through the Amidah with my eyes closed and say the words like a robot without thinking about them. Like I could actually do that because I just know the words well enough, and be thinking about something else. I've technically fulfilled my obligation to pray, but it's not like the ideal way of praying, certainly. So going back to the source here, and I think you're right, it's someone who is in trouble, they're running away from something which is bad, possibly, real human enemies, and they're turning to God as a savior. And this is fairly
Rabbi,
yeah.
As Claudette said, to her, the Psalms are more meditative, and they could be prayer and they could be meditative. So when you look at one and the other, how do you discern what is prayer, what is meditation? What's the difference between the two?
So I want you to hold that question until we get through the Psalms. I think it'll be better answered at the end than at the beginning. Okay?
Okay.
And part of it is because there's 150 Psalms in the Jewish Psalter, which is the fancy word for the book of Psalms. And they are of multiple types. And there are different ways of dividing them into different categories. One of the classic ways of doing so, list them The major types being hymns. It's 1, 2, laments of the community, 3, laments of the individual, 4, royal psalms, 5, thanksgivings of the individual, 6, the rest of them, pilgrimage songs, wisdom psalms, etc. Right? So you're going to have a different relationship with them depending on what psalm it is that you're reciting, right? Something like this one, I could see someone, who is in trouble, whether it's physical, like I'm really running away, or there's something you feel is pursuing you, you need to be saved, or Shir Mimam Akim Kraticha Hashem, from the depths I call out to you, O God, as being really prayerful, but like in a personal way. Whereas one could see prayer ones that are really communal, like Hodul Hashem Ki Tov Ki Olam Chasdo. Praise God, for God is good. The whole world, God's chesed, God's loving kindness is everlasting. Leolam in Psalms and Bible means time, not space. Whereas I think there are other ones which probably are a little bit more suited for meditation, but I think that they could all be meditative in the sense that saying poetry quietly, privately, is meditative. Now, whether meditation is something which is necessarily prayer, it is not. But I think people who have a sense of the divine while they're meditating, it is a form of avodah, form of worship. But if you meditate without a sense of the divine, then it is not a form of worship. Okay, so we'll skip number 3. So I want you all to take a minute and just read Psalm 29 to yourselves and ask yourself, if you were reading that, if you've never read this one before. Now you have, because this is one which we use. What is this like? How does this resonate with you? What does it make you think about? So just go ahead and read it.
As you needed this.
We're saying that God is all powerful.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want from
I want to know what you guys think. What's your initial reaction to this? What does it make you think about? How does it make you feel?
God is all powerful and he can do anything.
Okay. Is the language of shattering the cedars of Lebanon something that you are familiar with from elsewhere?
Kings from Solomon building the temple.
Okay, so the cedars of Lebanon are certainly there, but I don't think that it talks about God's voice shattering the cedars of Lebanon.
No.
Yeah, but the existence of the trees, yes. How about skipping like a calf?
How about
like
the
a young
voice
wild
of the
ox?
Lord? How about the voice of the Lord kindles flames of fire?
Right, all of those things, are those things that you're familiar with from anywhere else?
To me,
the Torah.
Yeah, that's like getting the 10 Commandments.
Okay.
And the Torah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we do have there. So from there we can sort of relate it back to Sinai when we know that there was, yeah, there's fire there. There's smoke. There's thunder and lightning. Midrash has fire. I'm actually would have to re-look at Exodus 20 and see if there's fire there itself. I think there probably is. Okay. And without spending our entire day on this psalm, one thing I do want to point out, and this will sort of lead to where I'm going. Havu Hashem b'nei Elim. So Havu, however you want to translate it, ascribe to the Lord, O divine beings. What divine beings is this psalm talking about?
Angels?
I thought he would be talking about us as people in general, divine beings.
I know. So I don't think it's us. I don't think people are ever referred to as B'nai Elim.
Ah, not being divine.
Although I think that's actually an interesting read, and I think one of the important things about Psalms and Torah is that we have to be able to relate to these things as sacred text, even when they make us uncomfortable, even if we think about their origins not being a place that we particularly like. So this psalm, going back as the first part of the 20th century, is recognized by, it was actually JTS professor Ginsburg, as having a clear Canaanite antecedent, that it was initially a hymn to Baal, right, the Canaanite god, that was made a little bit more appropriate to be used by Israelites. Okay? And I think some of the language here is indicative of that. Some of the imagery, the motifs, are motifs that are seen in other cultures in the ancient Near East. And we could really do that throughout. That doesn't make it bad. Okay? It makes it a product of its time and place. And just like a good musician borrows from someone who came before them and builds on it, I actually think that's you take what you have and work with it and make it better and different and make it suitable for your own needs. And I think that we have lots of examples of not a whole psalter from the ancient Near East outside of the Hebrew one, but of inscriptions and the like that are not all that different from what we see in Hebrew texts. And because we know how languages develop, we can tell, people who do this professionally, which came first, and it's not the Hebrew stuff. Okay. We'll skip number 5 because, okay, so number 5 is missing part of the translation. Lecha zevach todah, lecha ezbach zevach todah, uv'shem Hashem ekra. So a lot of psalms are written in pairs. Okay, so we have a pair, P-A-I-R, not P-E-A-R. And one way of seeing that, if you're just reading it on a screen, is this the symbol underneath. That's called an etnachta. So if this were Torah, it sounds something like Lecha ezbach zevach todah, pause, uv'shem Hashem ekra. It's a pause. So when you see Tehillim written out as verse, there'll be a break there, and uv'shem Hashem ekra will actually be on the next line often. But in this is all written in one line, but there's clearly, that's the pause. That's the line break right there. So lecha ezbach zevach todah. Ignore the translation. Etty, do you want to translate this for us?
Yeah, the translation doesn't matter.
Ignore the translation, is wrong. Okay. So how would you translate the first 4 words?
To you, I will sacrifice a sacrifice of thanks.
Of thanksgiving. Good. Okay, and it's.
And in the name of the Lord, I will call.
Good. Okay. So the first half talks about sacrifice, like literal animal sacrifice. A zevach todah is a specific kind of biblical sacrifice. And the second half talks about calling out to God, using one's voice, right? So there's a parallel between sacrifice, animal sacrifice, and
Calling God.
tefillah, some prayer in a very broad sense, using words to reach out to God. Okay? And then again, Psalm 54. Bin dava ez bachalach, odeshimcha, Hashem kitov. Okay, so I will offer you a free will sacrifice, okay, a different kind of sacrifice. Odeshimcha, I will praise your name. And then, what is your name? Hashem, or Odeshimcha Hashem kitov, depending where you want, if you want to put a comma in there or not. But again, it's comparing or making parallel animal sacrifice and psalms themselves. Take my prayer as an incense offering, my upraised hands as an evening sacrifice. Okay, upraised hands being a form of prayer, presumably here. So we begin to see psalms here as being, as recognizing that words themselves can be an act of worship. The saying of words has some sort of sense of equality with animal sacrifice. And this is where we sort of get lost in what Jews were actually doing and thinking during the Second Temple period. Beginning with King Hezekiah and King Yoshiyahu, we have the real centralization of worship. We have a strong movement away from the shrines that existed everywhere, right? To you really only could sacrifice in Jerusalem. Like you really can't do it anywhere else. So the question becomes, what do the Jews in Beit El do? How do they worship now that their altar has been taken away, smashed to pieces, right? What do the priests who used to work there do now that they're out of a job, right? So it's been suggested that a couple of things happen. One, well, not everyone's going to go to Jerusalem every time they want to pray. And by pray, I mean offer a sacrifice. They can't do where they are, and Jerusalem's too far away. They have to tend to their flocks and their fields. So there may be then already a movement towards some sort of worship that is free of animals. That is to say, worship with words. Okay? And then maybe that worship with words is equal in some way or parallel to animal sacrifice. And at the same time, now that the temple has all of these priests flocking to it because they're out of work where they were, and they're looking for meaningful employment, but also be able to be supported by their community, this could also be the time when we have all these priests. Maybe what are we doing with them? Let's make a choir. Right? And we think about psalms as being things which were sung in the temple, particularly by the Leviim, by the Levites, right? But that's not to say the Kohanim were totally excluded from this. And we don't really know what the Leviim would have done, at the other shrines elsewhere. So that's one of the reasons why we start seeing this parallel of language. Okay. We'll skip 8 and 9 because we run into the numbering problem. So it's actually not the examples that I wanted. Might notice too late. It is quite possible, as I was just saying, that there was a special role for psalms within the temple worship itself. And we can see that within the Psalms. So Psalm 138, I bow toward your holy temple. Now, we could look at that and say, like, well, I doubt in my own tefillah towards God's holy temple because I always face Jerusalem, right? You could say that. But arguably, when it's written as it's written here, it's no, like, you're really bowing to the temple because the temple's in front of you, right? And this is the language that's being used for it. The voice of the Lord causes hinds to calve, right? So this is Psalm 29, which we already saw. And in his temple, all say glory. right? So part of worship there. In Psalm 84, and of course the Psalms are not, it's not like the first 50 Psalms are this kind of Psalm and the next 50 are this kind of Psalm. They're not. They're all interspersed one within another. And there are ways of categorizing them that way, but they're not, it's not consistent. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha od yelucha selah. We know this one, right? Happy are those who dwell in your house. What is that like? How does that fit into anything else?
Your house. Is your house?
Look, okay, so we do have this idea of your house. So again, this we could be seeing this as being a temple psalm, like the next one. It's also, I think this is one of the examples of what we call wisdom psalms. How should you live your life? By dwelling in God's house. That's what's going to make you happy. Okay, so we have wisdom literature in Tanakh, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes are the prime examples of that. But there's also wisdom literature as part of Tehillim. How should you be a human being? And it's very different than I praise you, God. Right? It's, you want to be happy for the rest of your life? It's not about the pretty woman, it's about living in God's house. Okay. Psalm 134, just back to being in the temple again. So a song of ascent, it's like, you go up to the temple. Bless, Lord, all you servants, Lord, who stand nightly in the house of the Lord. And this is probably a reference to the Kohanim. They worked in shifts, and there's for 8 hours each, and there was the night shift. So maybe it's talking about them. Okay. But the Psalms also have a sense of self-reflection. And we see that in Psalm 102. Panat tfilat ha'arar v'lo vazat tfilatam. He has turned to the prayer of the desolate and has not spurned their prayer. And most importantly, tikatev zot ledor acharon v'am nivra yaluya. May this be written down for coming generation, that people yet to be created may praise the Lord. He looks down from his holy height, the Lord beholds the earth from heaven, to hear the groans of the prisoner, release those condemned to death, that him, Lord, may be recounted in Zion his praises in Jerusalem. So what is it that should be written down? And why are we writing it?
Well, we're writing it down for the coming generation. It's sort of like, all the generations were at Sinai, and God is looking after all the generations, not just the generation of whoever wrote this psalm.
So
Is
it's
he talking
perpetuated.
about the oral Torah?
So I don't think this is talking about oral Torah versus written Torah. We're too early for that. I think there's a sense that Psalms recognizes within its own corpus that it is something that should be available for future generations to use as a means to praise, right? As opposed to a person spontaneously choosing to praise God, like in the moment, which is the way Psalms were traditionally viewed, right? David had this thing happen to him. He's run away from Avshalom, and he said these words. We have these things that we want other generations to have in the future that they can use to pray with. So let's write it down. Right? So there's a knowledge of what it's doing as it's doing it.
And we certainly do.
And we do. And of course, Tehillim form a major, the biggest part, a majority of our liturgy. There's liturgy of praise that we take right out of Tehillim. because they fill that purpose very, very well. Even if we look at them as has this, and they came from this place, and we can read it this way, and but it's actually, it was supposed to be done alongside sacrifice. No, we can use it on its own terms. Going back to the temple, the Kaufman, Yechezkel Kaufman, who was a biblicist at Hebrew University, really transformed the field. He wrote a book called The Sanctuary of Silence. The title itself referred to the fact that there were no incantations or any words whatsoever that the priests had to speak while they did their work. And there seems to be, that is to say, a move away from what many interpreted to be magic, right? That what they were doing was effectuating God's choices, as opposed to doing something else. And one way to show that what we're doing different than other people is that when we slaughter this animal, we're not saying any words that change God's mind. In the meantime, maybe some other people at the temple, in fact, were saying some things. And maybe they're saying some things because the priests weren't saying anything, right? And they felt like the sacrifice maybe isn't doing it, and we want to share something verbal. And reciting Psalms, writing and reciting Psalms is an opportunity to do that. But Psalms themselves, the priests really don't seem to care about at all. And then finally, this last source we'll look at. Yeah, I think we'll stop here. I will extol God's name with song and exalt him with praise. Thou please the Lord more than oxen, bulls, horns with hooves. Right? So even within Psalms, we have this. Earlier, we saw the parallelism. It's the same as sacrifice. Here, it's like maybe even better. Maybe even better than sacrifice is using our words. And of course, while we were, as a community, forced away from sacrifice, right? The temple was destroyed. We were kicked out of Jerusalem by the Romans, and we had to turn to tefillah as a replacement. We also, certainly from a Maimonidean point of view, see tefillah as being an enhancement of over animal sacrifice. Right, that words are in fact better than killing animals in terms of worshiping God, and that's, I think, what this psalm at least is sharing. So I'm going to close off my screen, and if anyone has any final words of wisdom, please feel free to share.
Is it possible that because the rabbis or the sages, after the destruction of the temple, had all this material and this way of worshiping before the destruction, that it was easier for them to go down to Navia and create what we have today?
Absolutely. The fact that we had existing texts to work with helped made the transition from sacrifice to prayer easier, but it also wasn't a transition that happened overnight. Sacrifice itself ended. Temple destroyed, there is no more sacrifice. And I think by this point, but there was another temple in Elephantine in Egypt that was also gone by now. But there were already synagogues in existence during the latter part of the Second Temple period, right? So it wasn't like animal sacrifice stopped the next day, like, oh, what are we gonna do? Oh, let's pray. There was already the sense that people get together outside of Jerusalem in groups and use words as a form of avodah. And we can see that, even within the Mishnah itself, because it talks about what tefillah looks like. And the Mishnah is codified after the destruction of the Second Temple, but its contents clearly come from a time, gathered from materials that, already existed, likely during the Temple period.
It's more like an evolution than just a.
It was an evolution that was the timeline was pushed by external factors. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You are very welcome. I think just like last week, I unfortunately have to run to a shiva. I think last week I went to a shiva. I have to run for something and be back for 4. So I will see everyone next week. And next week we will be looking at, I wrote it down.
They're all on Zoom?
They're all on Zoom. Next
Okay.
week we're looking at spirituality in the rabbinic age.